I used to get pretty depressed about climate change until I did some research and found out that China is almost single-handedly saving the planet. China just tripled their new solar energy production in 1 year. At just 17% of the world's population, China is now home to 80% of the world's solar production. They produce a third of all renewable energy, 3 times more than the United States, who is now producing more crude oil than any country in human history. Over the next 5 years, China will build as much renewable capacity as the rest of the world combined, plus an additional 30% on top of that. Meanwhile, the United States is restricting the trade of affordable Chinese solar panels because theirs can't compete. China also plants more trees per year than any country in the world. They've been fighting back the spread of the Gobi Desert by reforesting as much land as the state of California. China's Great Green Wall project is their second wall big enough to be seen from space. You've seen the memes about Taylor Swift's private jet use. People are rightfully freaking out because air travel is easily the worst thing an individual can do for the environment. A single passenger on a flight from New York to LA and back is responsible for 10% of the average American CO2 emissions. Taking a train can cut emissions on a shorter flight by over 80% and actually save you time too, since high-speed rail can travel over 250 miles per hour. Also, train stations are easier to get to and don't have hour-long security lines. That's why I'm freaking out over the fact that China built 68% of the world's high-speed rail in just 15 years. High-speed rail is going to be the only sustainable way to travel quickly, and it's cheaper than flying too. It costs around $80, 1/3 of the price of flying, to take a high-speed rail train from Beijing to Shanghai. And if you're on a budget, you can take a slower train for as cheap as $20. For reference, that's around the same distance as New York to Chicago. Also, China is the leading producer and purchaser of electric vehicles, producing and purchasing over 5 times as much as the United States, who's in second place. Meanwhile, the United States has banned Chinese electric car brands from selling their superior quality and much more affordable cars to us. Apparently, there are now several smaller EV models that sell for under $10,000 in China, and they're actually nice and high-tech. The savings come from the insanely efficient and automated factories they've developed. Meanwhile, Tesla, one of the biggest companies in the United States, manufactures over half of their cars in China. So they're responsible for our production too. And the EU just hit China's biggest EV company with a 13-month audit to make sure that the government hasn't been unfairly helping the company develop its technology. We can't have governments helping to develop technology to save our planet from destruction, guys, because markets. But by doing that, the EU is admitting that socialist economies have an advantage, yet they're the ones saying that socialism can never work. Do you see how ironic it is that these capitalist countries have to use their governments to keep their failing industries alive because they can't compete with China on a free market? Gotta save the corporations at the expense of the consumer and the planet. When I visited Shenzhen, the streets were covered with a brand new fleet of electric taxis. The entire world needs to follow China's rapid pace if we want to prevent rising sea levels, massive crop failures, and extreme natural disasters that a few degrees of warming can cause. But the rest of the world is still too subservient to corporations and profits to prioritize this. But the only reason China can prioritize all this is also the reason why they're the biggest polluter in the world. I'll explain. First, understand that China's pollution comes from its development, building all the cities and infrastructure like the West has already done. Their pollution also comes from manufacturing so much for the rest of the world. China is the leading producer of coal because that's their energy source for today that will help them build the sustainable energy sources of the future. And it still puts China behind 14 other countries when you divide by their massive population. China pollutes way less per person than Japan or South Korea, while Australia, Canada, and the US all pollute almost 3 times as much per person. China has taken over 28% of the world's manufacturing and is the biggest trading partner of 120 of the world's 195 countries. Look around at all the clothing, electronics, machines, and even the phone in your hand. So much of it was made in China. In a sense, the world is exporting all of their emissions these products cause to China. We all do this because China made it so that the corporations need what they have. It's profitable for the corporations to play by China's rules because they've developed the best factories, have the most experienced workforce, and now have the largest middle-class consumer market. China understands that controlling production is the only path to sovereignty in this capitalist world. They chose to use capitalism's short-term profit-seeking against itself to bring a large share of the world's production under their control. And along the way, they had to pollute their own country a ton for foreign corporations to profit. They had to bring that money in to build their own production. And now they can afford to manufacture and develop all this green tech and focus on long-term goals. No capitalist countries can start a war with them or try to redirect their production to short-term profit-seeking. because the corporations in charge of the rest of the world are too invested in China now. They obey short-term profits while China is building the green economy of the future.